Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to my studio. My name is Michael Markowsky, and today we're going to recreate another painting by another one of my very favorite artists on this of most meaningful days of meaningful days, because today is Remembrance Day here in Canada and throughout the United Kingdom. In the United States, it's referred to as Veterans Day. And regardless of your feelings about the military or war, the fact is that millions upon millions and millions of people fought in various different conflicts over the centuries, and the likelihood that I would be standing here today and talking to you and having a little bit of fun, because that's ultimately what we're going to do today, is we're going to have a little bit of fun and make a painting. But if it wasn't for the sacrifices of the women and men who have fought and served on our behalf, and many of whom passed away on the battlefields, or when they got home, or suffered through the loss of limbs, or what we now consider PTSD, and there's veterans who are coming home from war as we speak right now, because of the things that they've seen and experienced. I think for just one short period out of our busy schedules, we can take a moment just to acknowledge their contributions to our culture and to our own lives, and to make it a little bit personal for ourselves. Okay. So, as you saw right off the top there was a special performance that was recorded. I recorded that just a few days ago with my good friend Jeremy. Jeremy was the MC at my wedding a few years ago, one of my best men, and a dear, dear friend of mine. He plays in, most recently in the symphony here in town, and just an awesome, awesome guy. And so I really appreciate, thanks Jeremy for doing that. I'm sure he's out somewhere right now playing that exact song. That's The Last Post, a very famous trumpet piece. He's probably playing it at a church somewhere in Vancouver right now. So there's a lot of stuff I want to get to today, but let's talk a little bit about the art that we're going to be recreating. So let's look at. This is the painting by the artist Mary Riter Hamilton, and this piece is called Trenches on the Somme. The Somme was one of the most horrific battlefields of World War I, and this is a painting that she made about a year after the war ended, or after the fighting ended, and we can see here a trench that is being overtaken by Flanders poppies that are growing inside of this trench. Now, it looks white as if it just snowed. That's actually because the trenches in this part of France, very near the Belgian border, were made of chalk, right? So they're carved into the chalk, like ground, giving it this very eerie white color that maybe we'll see in a few images here in a few moments. But I love this painting. It has also been commemorated on a Canadian postage stamp recently. So let's get kind of right into it. Here is the outline for today's painting, and you can print that outline off, and I'm going to show you in just a second here how to transfer it onto the canvas. So to find that outline, let's go here. There's a Dropbox folder. There's a link below to a Dropbox folder. If you click on that, you will see a whole bunch of different files down here. Tons of different images by artists from all over the world that we've looked at. I was thinking we did do a painting, A.Y. Jackson. We did a World War I themed painting by A.Y. Jackson when he was there at Vimy Ridge. So A.Y. Jackson, more famously known as a member of the Group of Seven here in Canada. But if you want to do another painting that is related to the World War I, that's something I would encourage you to do. And we'll talk about Molly Lamb Boback, actually, who we did in the previous painting series. We did a painting of hers, and she was also a Canadian war artist. So anyway, we go all the way down here. We'll go all the way down to Mary Riter Hamilton, folder number 91. You'll see 3 files in here. There's 2 versions of the outline. One's a PDF, one's a JPEG, and then, of course, the original image itself. Maybe just while we're right here, let's just take a quick look at, there's a private Facebook group just for people like yourself who are watching. I encourage you to upload your version of today's painting to the Facebook group, and then once a month I take a look at all the artwork on there and give some feedback to help artists grow and get better. It's I strongly encourage you to take advantage of the opportunity. It's free, and great community, awesome community of artists. So here's Shelley's Snow. Oh my goodness, snow already. And Dolores has already done a poppy painting today. That's awesome. Paula's version of the painting we made just the other day, the Edward Hopper painting, and Susan also did another poppy themed painting in for Remembrance Day here. Okay. Let's before we get into her biography, let's transfer this onto the canvas. We'll get it started, and while it's drying, we'll jump back to looking at her biography. So what I want to do is I just want to play this video, and this video just shows kind of the process of transferring an image onto a canvas. So again, just download that, print it off onto regular photocopy paper. I'm painting on a 9x12 sized canvas board. If you want to get the exact same one that I'm using, there's a link in the description below for that. And I just printed out from an inkjet printer I have here at home, but you could use a laser jet. It could be a photocopy printer at the local photo place, at the library, or at your work. And then I'm just kind of lining it up. I was just making a little bit of a extra look there to see if I could get that horizon line in the middle kind of as straight as possible. But if it's not perfectly straight, we can always straighten it when we paint it. Or you could leave it crooked. It would drive me bonkers, but you could certainly do that. And then I'm just going to trace around the main lines. I'm not going to do all of the little poppies, the red spots that are in the original. So here, let's just forward through this and you'll see what I mean. So I kind of do the major big shapes here. And so today's painting would be relatively straightforward if you wanted to just do it without using even the carbon paper. So you can see it, there's on the right side of your screen there's a pack of carbon paper. You can get that, I got that from a local dollar store here in Vancouver, but if you don't have that, you can order, there's a link in the description to order it from Amazon. But you can also find it at many fabric stores. Will often sell carbon paper and graphite paper because that's how they transfer images onto canvases. Or that's how they transfer patterns onto fabric that they then cut out and sew together. All right, so once you've got your image transferred onto the canvas, you can recycle this, or you could use it to, sometimes I find it helpful to test colors on, or that kind of stuff. So, or you could give it to a child and they could draw or paint on it, or maybe you could use some colored pencils or crayons and color it yourself. So, what I typically do at the beginning of every episode is, looks like this container's out. All right, so let's, I'm going to put a colored ground on this painting. And by colored ground, I mean a color that, rather than just painting directly onto the white surface of the canvas, if you've been painting along with me for a while, you know that I like to do this before I make every painting. And I like to use this warm yellow. It's just, I find it gives everything a nice warm glow. So I'm just gonna, while I'm here, I'm just gonna put my paint on the palette. If you want to know what colors I'm using, all of them are listed in the description below. I also did an episode called Art Supply Buyer's Guide, and I show all of what paints I would recommend you buy from all of the major paint companies that are out there. Okay, this one, I don't know why I keep putting it in here. Let's get rid of that. Is there anything in here? Okay. Got my paints on my canvas. There's obviously, I have black, but I rarely ever use black. And if I do use black, it's always sort of as a little bit of a extra thing right at the end. Got some white. There's going to be a lot of white in this painting. I find these lids always get kind of stuck and jammed up. Okay. We'll use that when we get to it. So I got my paint on the canvas. Let's put some, or on my palette, let's put some water. I'm just going to dilute this warm yellow. I see here in the chat there's lots of people in the chat. I love to see all that. Heidi asks, are you going to paint warm yellow first? It helps to do it ahead of time so it can dry. I pretty much, for, you know, every painting that I imagine doing going forward will be with this warm yellow. There's the, as you know, there's the odd occasion where I don't use a warm yellow. I should even make mention of it on the Facebook group there, because I know some of you like to want to be, you know, right ready to go, and sometimes I might go a little bit faster for some people, and so they want to be nice and kind of a little bit ahead, have a head start. But for the most part, I like to put this on every painting we've done. And we've painted, you know, 150 paintings. I think maybe about 130 of them are done this way. The only time I don't really do it is, I don't know, when have I not, I'm trying to think of a painting where I haven't done this and what my reasoning was. I can't remember why. I'm sure you guys probably remember better than I do. Sometimes it's just because it's an unnecessary step, because the painting is relatively straightforward and simple, and so I just go, I skip over it and you put the color that's going to be seen throughout the entire painting down first. But even then, I often will put this warm yellow on there. So, okay. So I've got my paint on here. Let's jump back to looking at the biography of this great artist. I'm a huge fan of Mary Riter Hamilton. I think probably because of my own experiences as an official war artist for Canada, and so I have a kind of a thing in my heart for anyone who's had a similar experience. My experience was certainly nowhere near as intense as hers was. I didn't go to a battlefield and document a battlefield. I got to spend time with the Air Force, and I got to go up to the North Pole. Yeah, not like Alaska or the Yukon. I went to the North Pole, the very tip of Canada, and I'm the first person to make landscape paintings at the North Pole, and I also got to fly in a CF-18 Hornet, and I'm also the first person to make drawings while traveling faster than the speed of sound, all thanks to the Royal Canadian Air Force, and those were incredible experiences. So Mary Riter Hamilton was actually not an official war artist. Why? For the simple fact that she was a woman, right? No surprise there. I was thinking about this as I was getting ready for today's episode, like how many of these episodes when we're painting artworks by women and we're looking at their biographies and this absurd wall that they keep running up against. One would like to hope that that's all just history, and we've progressed past that as a society, but I think there's still a lot of lingering prejudices against women. Anyway, that's a whole other thing. So we'll talk about Mary Riter Hamilton here. So born in 1873, dies in 1954 at age 80. But really, that last 30 years of her, 20 years of her life are quite sad, unfortunately. We'll get to that in a moment, but I mean, this woman faced a lot of adversity growing up. You know, she was married young. At age 18, she gets married to this fellow who is like a shop owner, and through their family, they're upper middle class, I suppose. And they have a child, but the child is born, or is stillborn, and then he dies a few years afterwards. So by the age of 26, she's a widow, and she sort of survives a little bit on the remaining money after selling her husband's business. But she's, you know, now a widow trying to figure out how to make things work. She uses some of that money to go to Europe, where I think she just decides, like, all of my plans, the vision I had for my life, it just disappeared. Everything fell apart. What am I going to do now? Well, one of the things I always wanted to be was an artist, and it didn't look like that was going to happen, and I guess let's be an artist now. Well, like, what I have, I've already lost everything, right? Let's do something different. So she goes to Europe and she studies in Paris and Germany and learns some of the traditional art techniques. She does, when she returns to Canada, so she spends about like 8 years or so in Europe, and then when she returns to Canada, she moves out west to Victoria, BC, and she kind of supports herself making commissions, painting portraits of people, and also painting these like silk scarves. And she's always, at this point, from kind of this point on, she's now very much like, you know, surviving right at that level, the poverty level. And World War I breaks out, and she's which is obviously traumatic for everyone beyond the soldiers who have to fight in the war, but of course the whole country, the whole world is caught up in it. And one of the things that ends up happening is she wants to go over to Europe and document the war. There's, in 1916, Lord Beaverbrook forms what becomes like basically the forerunner to what is now known as the War Artist Program, the same program that I was a part of. He forms that and invites a small number of well-known Canadian artists, all of whom are men, to participate in this program, one of whom is A.Y. Jackson, that I mentioned earlier at the top of the show. And she wants to be a part of this program as well, and she applies. She's writing letters, calling, trying to become a part of the program, but they keep on rebuffing her. And one of the things in the research I was reading is that it's because she's very pushy. We don't want a pushy person. Like, again, one of these comments that is used to demean and belittle and to push away any woman of any ambition whatsoever, right? So she is determined, and she befriends a soldier who has now returned from the war. What was his name? I don't know if it's mentioned in here. Or H.F. Patton, who was later on the person that essentially forms what is now known as the War Amps. And the War Amps at the time were kind of originally founded as sort of like a veterans club, as for veterans that have returned from war, and to support them and help them reintegrate back into the world. Of course, now we know that the War Amps does far more than that, and since I mention it here, has done great things for children and people that have had nothing to do with war, and helping them purchase artificial limbs and do rehab to reintegrate back into society. But she ends up, she's talking to this fellow and talking about how she would really like to go there and document the war, and he helps fundraise for her. And so it's the War Amps that send her to France right after World War I ends, and she goes there, and she, in her dress and her hat, is climbing over top of all of the ruins that were left over from World War I, and she's documenting the battlefields. And World War I, maybe more than even World War II, was like there was a lot of the destruction was total. And not only that, there were tons of unexploded bombs and landmines everywhere. And so there's Canadian soldiers that are still there for like a decade after the war, trying to help clean up. And also Canada sends this large group of Chinese workers to go and do the dirty work, right? Because, if it's a Chinese person that blows up on a landmine, well, that's a bummer. Right? It seems like the Chinese always seem to get the short end of the stick here in Canada, whether it's cleaning up after a war which they didn't fight in, or at least not in Europe, or building the railroads and getting sent into tunnels to blow up dynamite, right? I mean, okay, there's a lot of things that drive me crazy here when we're thinking about this, but anyway. So she's, let me see if we can find some images of, so here's her painting, in front of, in the ruins just outside of Ypres in Belgium. I'm not even sure I've never even tried to say that. I've read a lot about World War I, and I've never, Ypres? I'm not even sure how that's pronounced. But that's her painting. There's a few other images of her painting here. Is it in this? Right? Look at her in her smock. And she's doing this, she got help by the War Amps to go out there and make these paintings, but she didn't have a lot of support. She's basically funding this entire trip with her life savings, of which now is starting to, basically depleted. She, in fact, did not even have money to return to Canada after making all these paintings, and had to work when she was in Europe, again painting little things on the street and selling them in order to afford to come back to Canada. So she wasn't paid by the government to do any of this. This is just her desire to capture this experience before it was gone. And this is a great quote. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but she says, like, to have been able to preserve some memory of what this consecrated corner of the world looked like after the storm is a great privilege and all the reward an artist could hope for. I mean, an incredible altruistic spirit of documenting this horrible experience that millions of Canadians and tens of millions of people from all over the world experienced, and that battlefield was slowly being taken back by the natural landscape, and it was, as she's there, it's like it's slowly disappearing. And she had this big idea of she's going to make all these paintings, she's going to come back to Canada, and it's going to go on this national tour, going every museum and community center, and people are going to come and they're going to look at the experience of their brothers and fathers and sons, and they'll understand what they went through. She gets back to Canada. No one wants to show these paintings. No one wants to think about the war anymore. Everyone is like, no, that the last thing anybody wants to do is look at paintings of battlefields and think about what these men went through. Most of the people who were fighting were, the vast majority were men, right? So now she wasn't thinking about selling these. Again, she just wanted to show people what she saw. And actually, while she was there, she had saw so much horrific stuff that she basically came down with what we now know as PTSD, and she was broken. She was spiritually, emotionally, physically exhausted. She was now penniless, dirt poor. She lost everything in the war, and certain things I was reading about consider her a casualty of World War I, even though she never held a gun and never fought. But that experience of stepping into the trenches and trying to and doing her best to document that experience destroyed her. Right? And there's no other. I mean, it's not an exaggeration to say that it destroyed her. She did make some art when she got back to Canada, but even then, she was teaching these classes. She was teaching people how to paint like china. Like ceramics, and teach painting classes, but it never really paid off. And I think in the mid-1930s, she's becomes a patient at an institution here in Vancouver, what would have been known as an asylum or a mental hospital back then, and that's where she spends the next 20 years of her life. And it's it's very, very sad. But I think what makes it sort of worse is just the prejudices against a female artist at this time. Had this been another artist, and there were other artists, again, A.Y. Jackson, David Milne, Lauren Harris, Arthur Lismer, members of the Group of Seven, who came back and made paintings during World War I, and who were celebrated for it, whose paintings are now in the National Gallery of Canada. She tried to donate her artwork at first to the Winnipeg Art Gallery, or what is now known as the Winnipeg Art Gallery, or I think that's what they call it now. And she just wanted to give it away. No money, no tax receipt or anything. She wanted to give this archive of 300 paintings she made during this experience. And they rejected it. She then tried to give it to the National Gallery of Canada, and they rejected it. They didn't want it. So she ended up donating it to the Library and Archives of Canada, where it sat in boxes as an archive, as documents, rather than as artwork for the past 100 years, essentially. It's not until very recently that it's been they've been kind of unearthed, and some exhibitions have been held of this work. I just want to point out, before we're going to jump into the paintings here in a second, but I see, you know, there are a couple here, a few books I just want to make mention of for people who are interested in reading a little bit more about this great artist. Is I Can Only Paint. This is a very recent biography. And then this one, No Man's Land, The Life and Art of Mary Riter Hamilton. So, let me see. I think there's a few more images of... I mean, these are great paintings. One of the... Is it in this article? Yeah, this curator here, the Laura Brandon, former art curator at the War Museum, says that Hamilton's paintings are not very good as some of the other artists of the same era. Oh, happen to be male artists. Yeah, okay, sure. Like, again, these prejudices, even by a female art curator, at the, you know, and then she goes on basically like, she probably should be even less well known. It's just the kind of the because she went, you know, had this bit of the drama behind how she created the paintings, but if that didn't exist, she wouldn't be well known, and she should probably be forgotten. Which is, I can't even believe this person was getting a paycheck by us taxpayers. Anyway, let's paint today's painting. So, how are we going to begin the painting? So, what I want to do is we're going to work our way from the back to the foreground. Now, today's painting is essentially kind of done in the style, I guess you could say, of the Impressionists. So we can paint this, you know, with a lot of freedom, and we don't have to be too, what we might call it, we can be very loose with the way that we interpret the painting, or I would encourage you to be that way, and I'm going to try to paint this in a similar sort of fashion, in that, like, I want to try to do a lot of mixing on the canvas, maybe using a little bit thicker paint as I apply the paint on here, and in that way it should also kind of feel like a painting that is kind of fun to paint, that it's despite the subject matter. I think her paintings also intend to show some resilience and to show the beauty that it sort of exists or existed in these spaces, to try to rehabilitate them, to rehabilitate these landscapes from the horror that they witnessed. So I think this is a beautiful painting, and again, despite the content or the context of it, I'd be more than happy hanging a painting like this in my house. I think I find a lot of like inspiration from it. Okay, so let's get into this painting here. A lot of talking off the top. I apologize, but there's a lot of stuff I wanted to say here, and people, if they want to skip ahead, they can always skip ahead, right? So let's start out with the background. So I want to tackle this blue back here. Now, I don't think she painted the warm yellow that I did, and maybe that's what Heidi was asking before. But I'm just going to mix my white. And I think this white has been in a tube for a long time. So, because I was squeezing some old tubes that hadn't been used in a few years here. So this paint is pretty thick, to the point where I'm actually thinking so rather than adding a bunch of water to this, I'm going to add some matte medium. So matte medium is basically paint without any color in it. It dries totally clear. I'm just going to add a little bit of this to my paint here. Some people would go and mix a whole bunch of water into the paint, and I think that would be a really, well, I mean, it's not a bad idea, it's just not the best idea. right? Because water is just going to dilute it. And it also, you know, if you think you use water to clean your brushes, it's going to make it a little bit grainy, and it destroys the bonds that hold the pigment together. Now, you're probably saying, but didn't you use water to do the yellow background? Yeah, because that's just in the background. We're not going to see it. We're going to paint over every little bit of it. So, you know, I'm not too concerned about that. I am concerned about the subsequent layers, the stuff that is going to be most visible to us on the top layer. And we could, yes, absolutely use some of the matte medium and mix it into our yellow. The only reason I don't do that is because it takes longer to dry, right? So I want to get these paintings going as quickly as possible. Okay, so you can see this, it turned that paint that was of like a very thick, dry, toothpastey texture into a much, basically returned it back to its original normal quote-unquote state, right? So let's brush this in. Okay. Let's move that out of the way. Okay. I mean, there is a bit of that yellow coming through. So it's sort of up to you to decide if that drives you nuts or not. I'm not sure if it drives me nuts. I don't mind it just yet, but I could certainly do another coat later on if I want to. So let's now, I'm going to take just some more cold blue and just mix this here. The other thing too is she's making these paintings on location. She's painting this while she's standing in this trench. She didn't make these paintings while she's sitting, you know, back in her studio in Toronto, like, you know, some of the group of 7 did. You know, they made their sketches while they're away, and some of them made, like A.Y. Jackson made a number of his wartime paintings when he was back in London, England, right? So especially if we think about all of the paintings she made during this time as being plein air paintings made at the site of these battlefields, I think that gives us, for me, that makes these paintings even more meaningful, because it's like they are there in the sharing the air of that space. They're also done very quickly, not unlike paintings by Tom Thompson when he's sitting in his canoe in Algonquin Park. And so I think that might account for maybe why they look the way they do, maybe not as finished as some of like the paintings of World War I by other artists. But, you know, when we did our A.Y. Jackson painting of Vimy Ridge, I showed there was 3 versions of that painting. He did do one at Vimy Ridge, and it is a very, very loose oil sketch, as it's called, like a very quick painting on like a small little canvas. And then he did another one, and then he did a 3rd version of it, right? So, but what we have of Mary Riter Hamilton is just the painting she did while she was there. Because again, when she got back to Canada, she was destroyed, right? She just was not. She, I think, would love to have turned these into bigger canvases and done something with them, but I just think she was done. I don't think she could muster up the energy. Okay, so now let's mix a brown. Let's do a cool brown. So let's take some cold yellow. I'm going to take this cold blue and some cold red, and let's mix this all together. We get this kind of barf green. Okay. So that just tells us that we need maybe more red in here. Yeah, that needs maybe a little bit more yellow. Okay. Like that. But we want to significantly add a lot more white to this. So I'm just going to wipe off that paint. And let's take, again, this paint here. Some white. And I'm going to add a bit of my acrylic medium to it. I mean, most people don't have to do this. If you're sitting there thinking like, oh, I don't have any acrylic medium, that's just, again, I'm only doing that because that paint has this white that I'm using here is probably 4 years old, an old tube of paint that started to kind of dry inside the tube. So I'm basically just rescuing an old tube of paint. Okay, so I've got this color. This is a bit of a cold brown, and let's add just maybe a bit more. Well, this is a bit more cool yellow than I was expecting. It really changed this, but we'll paint with it, and I'm probably going to do a few layers here. And you know what? I'm going to take a big scoop of paint out because I want to paint this in a bit of that impressionist kind of approach. So how about I'm just going to start in the top left corner. Oops, let's go this way. And I might obscure some of these details. I'm going to try to keep it in here. You can see mine's got a little bit more of a brown kind of quality. I don't mind that though. Because I'm going to do a couple of layers of this, right? And with her style of painting, I don't mind if I get, you know, some texture in here. Maybe I'm a little bit close in. I'm just going to zoom out a little bit because I'm just afraid you'll get lost in the details if you're following along. So if I was painting this in oil, I'd be able to do a few things that I can't do so much with acrylic, because this acrylic's going to start drying. I mean, it's already drying right now, even as this paint is on here. So I'm just going to paint in layers, and if there's a little bits of blobs of paint that are there, that's okay. That will allow that paint to mix into them. So I'm just going to add maybe a little bit of this cool blue back into the paint. Alright, so I'm just like, it's like I get some paint on here and I just have a dirty paintbrush. I'll zoom back out again. Oops, maybe not too much. So this idea of just kind of going right at it, just attack this canvas, use up lots of paint here. You can see the paint is kind of smudging and mixing on the canvas itself. And this will go kind of a bit gray later on, but I'm going to put this in here. Take some of this cool blue. I'm just going to put it right down here. Even though there's going to be some warmer blues and stuff down here, it's like... See the kind of speed that I'm trying to get to while I'm doing this? I'm going to take a bit of this cool red and mix it in here, and we're going to get a bit of a purple going. It's a bit much, so let's take a bit of white and mix that in here. Still using my nice, like, big paintbrush to do this. I'm just going to take a bit more of this pink. And we're going to paint over a bunch of these things later. If I was painting with oil, I'd probably have a little bit of a different approach, but I'm loving this. This is great. I'm having a blast. This is fun. Okay, so we've got a lot of these cooler colors in here so far. So what I'm trying to do is think of, like, I have a foreground right down here. This is a foreground element. And then we have our middle ground in here, and then background up here, right? The water and kind of the back of this trench that kind of curves around, right? So we're gonna try to go in behind here. So we'll get, this is still our kind of first layer, our underpainting we're working on, right? So I'm just gonna take that paint off, and let's clean our brush now. Okay. So same brush, I don't even bother cleaning it because I like it when it gets a little bit dirty like that. So let's now take some white. And I don't mind if there's some of that previous color mixed in with this white. Let's take a bit of the warm yellow. That was a bit too much. That's okay. In fact, before I even mix it in totally, let's just go right, take it, and allow it to kind of mix on the canvas here. Actually, now that I look at it, I could have gone a little bit darker, so you never know. You never know until that paint gets on the canvas what it's going to look like, so. come up into here with some of these warmer yellows and white. Okay, I'm going to make a bit of a brown. I'm going to take my warm red and warm blue, mix this together. Actually, I kind of like this. Just, I was going to do a little bit more mixing, but I'm just going to take a bit of that. I just like getting all the extra paint that's on top of the brush, squeezing that out onto the canvas. Let's take a bit more of the warm blue. So what we're doing is we're sort of painting the under part of there's gonna be all these poppies all over top of everything here, but I want to get the colors that are kind of underneath all of those poppies. Like, look at this, some of these brush strokes, how quickly they're applied. She's really moving quickly, and it's, you know, potentially it could be, you know, it would have been a very difficult kind of environment to paint in, right? It's possible that she'd be painting and the soldiers might tell her she's got to move because they're gonna try to explode some munitions that they found underneath the, in a trench area, and so she could be 20 minutes into a painting really happy, and then she's got to pack up and move, and then they blow it up and everything that was there is just gone all of a sudden, right? I mean, it's hard to really imagine what kind of difficulty she would have been up against in this particular situation as a painter. Okay, so I don't know, like I'm look at it and go, I don't mind that sky like I did. I mean, I could paint it again with some blue, cold blue and white, but would it get any better? Like, would it be, is that necessary? I don't know. Same thing with this water. I think there's probably a little bit more warm blue in here, but I like the way that I've painted it, so I might just leave it. I'm kind of digging the looseness of that. We'll see. I mean, as I get closer, maybe I'll say like, yeah, you know what, let's just do it. But at this exact moment, I'm feeling okay with the way it is. I want to make a bit more of a brown again. So by her putting these warmer colors right here, in fact, I could go a little bit darker, but that's in order, what she's trying to do is trying to get this ridge to kind of pop forward here. So some of this I'm just sort of throwing paint around because I just want to build up some layers of like interesting color that might almost entirely get covered up later on. But I don't know, I want to be able to, I want the viewer when they look at it to feel like, oh, look, there's lots of stuff going on in the underneath. Lots of little colors popping. Okay. That's good. I am just gonna clean this brush for a second. Now it's, you know, I haven't cleaned it at all except just wiping the paint off on this towel here. Now I'm gonna go back to my white. Maybe just take a bit of that color that was there, maybe a bit more cool yellow. And actually, I think I'm going to go to a smaller brush now. Not bad, but didn't want it to go blue. So I'm just allowing this kind of, this is pretty thick paint. I could probably have put a bit of matte medium into this. In fact, I'm just going to do just that. Alright, so I just put a little bit of matte medium in here just to thin, it'll also thin it out a little bit, which could be kind of nice so I don't have such thick, my little bit of transparency could be kind of nice. So I'm trying to get some of the colors just to mix a little bit on the canvas. Still painting with this white that's got some cool yellow in it. And as I go back into my palette, I often just sort of just dab a little bit of color back onto this brush, so that I'm not getting like a super clean color. I want lots of little nuance going on in here. So. Okay. Maybe I'm going to take a bit of that, just not even wash my brush, just go right in here. Actually, let's take a bit of matte medium. Sandra, my mom's name is Sandra. Not my wife. So there's a little bit of fiddling that I'm doing around here, but I also just love this kind of thing, right? And it's like I'm kind of painting over things that I've painted already, but it's like having all these little bits of things just shining, kind of coming through. That's what I love. I love that kind of stuff, like just this little bit of purple or something coming underneath here. So, I mean, it's tricky doing this with acrylic paint, because if we were doing this oil paint, we would be able to kind of be smudging all of these colors together, and that would be pretty satisfying. But with acrylics, we kind of got to sort of fudge it a little bit, right? Okay. So I think I like that my palette's kind of. This might sound funny, but I like that my palette is getting a little bit muddy, because I want to have a few grays in here, and grays are just like, I mean, I can just take some cool blue, some warm red, mix this together, and I'll get a really nice dark color. In fact, I'm going to use this color just as it is. Just in a few places. Okay, take that color. Let's take some white. mix this in here. We're going to need a bit of cool yellow. A little bit more warm red, and then we get a gray. Still looks a little bit blue. Put a bit more red, warm red, and cool yellow into it. Just kind of kills all the color right out. Okay, and then I'm just going to modify. So now I've got a gray, and I can use this gray however I want. I'm going to mix a bit of warm blue into this gray. Let's take a bit more white. I got this backwards. I thought it was this color and then lines over top, and then I just look at it a little bit closer and I think it's the other way around. These lines, there was a darker color underneath and then this gray over top. Is it, is it the end of the world? No, not at all. So let's just take this warm blue, mix it back into this gray, and then I'm just going to take a smaller brush again. This is the opposite of what she did here. She would have put a color like this underneath and then put the gray over top, because these are some sort of like a walkway, these like planks on the ground, because these trenches would flood, right? And sometimes soldiers would drown in these trenches when they flooded. There would be rats inside here. It was just nothing short of a complete and utter nightmare for everyone involved. Absolute horrifying situation. It's a little bit too much of this blue. Just gonna wipe a bit away. And now I'm just gonna take some of this warm blue, pretty much right out of the tube here. Put a bit of this around. I have a feeling we'll be coming back into this later on. Like, there's no necessarily rhyme or reason for how I'm doing some of this here. Again, I'm just laying in color, and then I can modify it all later on. Okay. How about let's now take, I'm going to see if I mix a bit of this warm blue and cool yellow together. I think I need to take a bit of the cool blue in here too. The thing is, this color is a little bit too electric, so that's why I'm taking a bit of warm blue and putting in here. It just kind of kills a bit of the intensity of that cool blue. Let's see this. We'll see how electric this is. how about let's now kind of, we're getting into the detail-y stuff, so yeah, so that's a little bit intense. Let's see if I get a bit more warm yellow into this color. I think we're going to be doing a little bit of both. So now that's a little bit, I think she's moving back and forth between a warm green and a cool green. So what I've got right now is a bit more of a warm green. So I'm going to put that in the foreground. In this area right next to this little plank, the situation that we created. And I think you can feel free to kind of go a little bit nuts with this green, because you can always paint over anything you don't want. So I'm just sort of, again, like an impressionist kind of pointillist approach here. Putting these bit warmer greens here. And there's even a bit of extra, you know, a little bit of a very, I guess I'll just take some warm yellow right on there. You can see it popping through in here. Okay, and then we'll go back to this bit more of an electric cool green with cool yellow, cool blue, and I'm just going to take a bit of white in there just so it's not so bright and intense. By adding white to it, we dilute the saturation. So let's zoom back out a bit. Okay, this cool green. So don't worry about just get the paint in here. Doesn't have to be perfect. Nothing in life has to be perfect, or should really even be perfect anyway. Like what is an example of something that's perfect? I don't even know if something exists, you know, that is objectively perfect. We were talking with my students at Emily Carr, where I teach, the university I teach at, the other day, and we were reading that book, Art and Fear, and we were just talking about perfection and how, you know, some people would say, oh, the Mona Lisa is perfect. But I bet you if you were able to go into a time machine and talk to Leonardo himself, he would beg to differ. He would probably tell you it drives him crazy, all the mistakes and things that are in there. Or what he considers mistakes. You might be like, what? Leonardo? It looks great. And you'd be like, no, can I just... let me have it back. I just want to fix a few things. And you're like, what? You can't have it back. It's a national treasure. Which is why there's a great movie. I was talking to my students about this again. There's a movie called The People vs. George Lucas. It's a... This movie, The People vs. George Lucas, is a great documentary. This is at our local library. Very, very interesting. Like, the first maybe hour is pretty silly, but by the end, when it really starts talking about, like, who owns an artwork? To whom does an artwork belong? It's because essentially what this is about is George Lucas has been tinkering with the original Star Wars movie for decades, adding new things, and he continues to kind of manipulate it. Well, now that he sold it to Disney for like $5 billion, it's officially hands off. But he kept tinkering with the film, and people are like, hey, you're messing with our childhood. It's ours now. It's not yours. Stop playing with it. And I think it brings up all sorts of interesting things. It's like, who owns the artwork? Is it really up to him? Does he... yeah, he made it. Does it really... can he change the movie 30 years after it was made? I don't know. People have literally sued him to get him to stop changing that movie. And now, of course, Disney owns it, and so he can't. We'll see if Disney manipulates it. I would imagine they would probably try to keep it... I don't imagine they would want to do much more to it, just out of being cheap. You know, they're probably just like, why would we spend another penny on this, unless 20 years from now we have holograms and we're watching movies on big holographic stages. But beyond that, I think they would be like, let's just make money off of this thing rather than pumping more money in. But George Lucas, he had billions of dollars, and he's like, hey, I'm the artist. I could spend my money and tinker with it infinitely. Okay. Now, let's... I think we've got a pretty good foundation in here. Again, I might go back in and tinker with a few things. But what I want to do now is start putting in the poppies. So, let me just think. Do I have this gray? Before I do that, I'm just going to take this brown and a bit of this gray. I was just like, saw it out of the corner of my eye and said, you know what? I think this needs a bit more of this gray in here. And now I am sort of just painting over top of these blue lines. think that's good. That in there. I'm not sure what I want to do down here. Maybe before I do that, let's just experiment. I feel like it's got a bit of a greenish, slightly turquoise kind of quality. Cool blue with a bit of white. Almost like drips or something in here. I'm not, which is quite possible. I think it's, you know, maybe I'll take up my rag here and just wipe a bit of that away. Let's see, does that do anything? What if we take a bit of white and mix it in here? So I just feel like it looks like these drips down there, right? Okay. Yeah, and then maybe let's just take this rag and see if I can kind of soften some of those white lines. Okay. Okay, now let's do the poppies. Okay. So, you know, I just want to just double check before I start throwing red around here and just see if there's a particular way that she did this. It looks like we could basically paint it as we did. Maybe as we get closer to the bottom here, it looks like she's actually doing some shaping of these flowers, but at least for the top part, it looks very much just like an impressionist sort of dabbing of paint, and it looks mostly just like warm red right out of the tube. So I think we'll be fine with this. The one thing with warm red, I always find it's a little bit dull, so I think I'm just going to get a bit more white out here. And again, in case you're just joining, I'm putting a little bit of this acrylic matte medium and mixing it into my white, because this white has been sitting in a tube for probably 3 or 4 years unused, and has kind of gotten a little bit, the paint has started to dry a bit, so kind of rescuing it a bit by putting this matte medium in there, because matte medium is just paint without pigment, right? Okay, that's good. So I might mix a bit of white into the red here, which makes it, yes, it does make it go a little bit pinkish. But we are going to be painting, you know, if we look, come on, especially as these flowers go further back into the background, we want to have a little bit of white in them, because it's going to make them look like they're a little bit further away. So I'm going to start with that, and then we can about let's go right up to the top left corner here. The other thing with having a bit of this white in here is if I paint over top of a few of these things with just red right out of the tube, that red is really going to pop a lot. It's going to help give it a bit more of an opacity. So I just thought I would just show a little bit, you know. So for right now, I'm not putting all of these dots of paint, blobs of paint, right next to it. I'm leaving a little bit of space. So it's almost a bit uniform. And then I'll slowly start to kind of add a little bit more variation in here so that they don't look like it's a pattern, but we want a bit of that chaotic arrangement. We don't want it to be too well organized, otherwise it just looks really strange and artificial. So now I'm in the top right corner of my painting here. You can see my blobs aren't all in the exact right place. They don't have to be perfect, right? We're not machines. We're not trying to make exact reproductions. We just want to learn how the great artists kind of did what they did, and then that way we can apply it to making our own paintings, right? And I just find it very inspiring, you know, this ambition to document a part of the world before it's gone. You know, that she was, I think she did us all a great service, and that, you know, like right after the war, no one wanted to think about this war. It was a catastrophe. There's no other way to. It's hard to really spin, especially World War I, in a positive way. I mean, it was like an accident, or that just sort of spun out of control. At least with World War II, you have like a definite bad guy in Adolf Hitler. In World War I, it's just like a bunch of countries just sort of found themselves dragged into this conflict, and they don't even really know why they're there or what they're doing. They've got all these different treaties that just sort of forced everyone. As soon as one country declared war on another, all of a sudden everyone's sucked into this vacuum. And just a total nightmare. And so I love that, you know, no one wanted to think about it, everyone wanted to forget about it, but she was there standing in the muck and the rain painting these paintings, knowing that, you know, 100 years from now, right, these paintings, this is 1919 that she made this painting, and here we are 100 years, 101 years or so since this painting was wet on her canvas. We're unearthing these paintings and we're looking at them, and now they're really, really meaningful. Now we are like, oh, thank goodness she was there. Thank goodness she documented. Like, I mean, just beyond the fact that this is a beautiful painting, and it's like, I just think it's just this gorgeous image of these poppies. Even if we didn't even know what the context was for them, we would think like, wow, this is really beautiful. And then here it's like this thing that no one wanted to think about at the time, that now we're fascinated by. And she was ridiculed and rejected for it, and died poor and unappreciated, basically forgotten. And now finally people are turning and being like, hey, that woman kind of was way 100 years ahead of her time. Thank goodness someone was there to... Someone who again, was not... You know, the government didn't send her there. And she went there because she thought that this was something important. Okay, so I got a bunch of these blobs of paint, and we're gonna now, I just want to zoom back out so we can see them all and think about like how we want to continue going forward. So like just a few things that I see here, right? I started putting some of these darker colors in the bottom right corner and was like, oh, that was really too much. And I put some down here, I'm like, oh, that's a little bit too dark in there. And now that I see it, with some of the red, I think like, oh, you know, I probably should have done a little bit more of that. Huh. So that's okay, because we can still do stuff down there, but it's just one of those things that you don't really know until until it's happening, or until it's done, what it looks like. So doing the bottom left corner here. Some of these blobs are going to get bigger. I'm starting off a little bit smaller and taking my time to build up to those larger sizes. Because some of the, you know, some of these are kind of like the flowers that are in behind or underneath, and okay, I'm feeling pretty good about that. I think what I want to do is now take a bit of this cool red and get a bit of white in here. And I want to take this, because I can see, like, I'm not exactly even sure what she's doing here, but I don't know if she means these to be more flowers. I want to be careful here not to turn this into a big blob, right? I want it to I want to preserve some of the all these different colors in here. So it's got these kind of, I'm not even sure what, there's like little bits of swirls of cool red. Okay. And then I'm going to do the same sort of thing. I'm going to take a bit of this blue, warm blue. Bits of pops of purple. Just some blue on its own with some white. And so now I'm starting to kind of get a bit of, quite a lot of texture in here. Again, I just want to be very careful I don't just load it up too much. I want people to be able to see down through here. And so that can be kind of tricky to preserve those little windows into the depth of the painting. Because remember, we want it to kind of curve around in here. Some of this white and blue, warm blue. So again, I'm kind of doing the same sort of thing, taking it and painting it into and in between some of these areas here. That's great. This little bit of white now coming here really, to me, feels like it's yanking the foreground forward and creating a whole bunch more depth that wasn't there just a short little while ago. Like, the fact that this painting is not on permanent display in Canada's National Gallery and that it's just sitting in the archives of Canada's basement, like, in a box, is just... Pff. I mean, maybe it's on loan now, but the fact that it's taken 100 years for that to happen is shameful. Not surprising, but... So I'm going to go the other way now. Let's take our dark color. Remember we made, in fact, I think we're going to mix a bit more of it. Cold blue and warm red. Mix that together, and I'm going to mix it into some warm blue. So this gives us a really dark color, but I also want it to sit right in the foreground, so putting a bit of this warm blue here is just going to locate it towards the front of the picture. And we will use this also for like the centers of the poppies and stuff. And then we're going to go back over one last time with some more warm red. In this area. So how about let's just zoom back out and just take a look at both of these in their current states. Okay. I'm going to take a bit of white in this color. Oops, too much white. I didn't think. So I just added a little bit of white in there just because I didn't want, it doesn't look like this, the darkness that we see in the bottom right isn't quite as intense on the left-hand side of the painting. So I just wanted to avoid getting this too dark over here. Pops of this darker color. Carol just made a donation. I appreciate that, using the super chat function. Awesome. Thank you so much, Carol. That's so generous of you. Everything in this show just operates on donations, so your support definitely means a lot to me. If anyone else is thinking of donating, and you can use the super chat function here in YouTube, or you can also send a donation via PayPal. There's a link below, or by contacting me through the Facebook or my email, which is on my website. All those links are down below. Again, thanks, Carol, for reminding me. It's one of those things that I hate doing, but as soon as I started mentioning it, all of a sudden I got a whole bunch of donations. I'm like, oh. And that's, YouTubers will talk about that. And if you don't tell people to subscribe, no one will subscribe. And you tell people to subscribe, and all of a sudden hundreds of people start subscribing. So that's why you hear people on YouTubers going like, hey, click subscribe, because if you don't, people don't do it. So it's annoying, but when you're on the other side of the fence, you're like, ah, okay, I guess this is why that happens, hey? taking a bit of warm green and applying this in a few places. So you can see there's a bit of back and forth. It's not just like I get it all done all at once. Sometimes I gotta kind of go back and make a few adjustments. Okay. Likewise, I'm just gonna take a bit of this cool green. I guess I need to make it a bit more bluish. Okay, so I'm feeling like I'm getting close to doing my final steps, which are to put a little bit larger blobs of for the poppies, and then I think we'll be done. Heidi's signing off. Have a good night, Heidi. So now let's just go in this warm red. Well, you know what? I'm gonna paint. I've got this warm red that's kind of contaminated with another color, but I can also do a little bit with that as well. Have some darker poppies. That's great. You know, it's funny because, you know, this is not, it's, yeah, sometimes, you know, that having a color like that on your palette, and you mix it together, you're like, oh, you know what, I kind of needed that. I needed that in a few places. I want this bit of a darker red just as because I don't want it all be this exact same red on here. I want a few, at the very least a few that are a little bit darker and bigger. Okay. And then now I'm just going to put a little bit more. Oops, that was a lot of warm red. And here I'm going to use some big blobs, a pretty big, thick brush stroke or application of paint, because this will allow these big areas of red in its opaque quality to really stand out. If they're really thin, they'll go very dark. So The other thing too is we can have some of these flowers sort of bunching up together, so they're not all just distinct floating around in space, not touching one another. That will also look a little bit weird. So you want to have like some clusters of these flowers. And you know, I am looking at the original, but I'm also starting to really think of my own as my own painting now. So if yeah, so which is what I think if you're at this point in the painting, you want to be paying less and less attention to the original. I think she's gone much higher up here. There's more green back in here. More cool green. So I think I'm going to get a bit of this cool green thing going a bit. And again, that's why I find out kind of like being zoomed out can be kind of helpful, because sometimes it's hard to see some of those details. You're all the way zoomed in. And then I'm going to take a bit more of this cool red and some white. Let's add a bit of warm red to it, but make it predominantly cooler, so that when we put these, just want it to kind of be receding. Do we need any bigger? I think I'm pretty happy with that. I want to put a few dark spots in the middle of some of these poppies close to the foreground here. And we don't need to do a lot of them for us to understand that they're poppies, right? So I almost have to just show a little bit of restraint here so I'm not putting little blue dots in the center of every flower on here. Okay. Feeling pretty good about that. How much more do I want to do? I don't know. I mean, she's got a little bit darker in here, but a little bit darker in here. I just don't know if I want to go down there and start fiddling in those little areas. I don't know. I guess there's a little bit more cool blue up here. So this is just some cool blue with a lot of matte medium to get it a bit more transparent. Alright, so I'm just taking a little bit of my dark color. Again, I'll mix it in there. I'm just going to use a rag and kind of wipe it a bit. I know what exactly, I'm almost there. I guess we need just a bit more white in here. I don't know. I think I should leave it. Nice, and there's a lot of texture on here. You can see, not quite as much as on the Anamolka Ahmed palette painting we did, but you know, you can see there's some texture on there, which is, I think, really fun to build that up. Okay. Mary Riter Hamilton's Trenches on the Somme. I think she was able to get definitely a bit more depth than mine. I think there's little things in here. You know, that's why she's a great painter, right? I think that she did a fantastic job. Should be a much more well-known painting than it is, and I think she did a fantastic job of it. Okay. So just as we wrap up, I just thought I would take just a couple moments to just pay a little bit of respects to some members of my family who've served in the military, Canadian military. So, let me see. Some of these photos I have never seen before. My mom sent these to me just the other day. So this is, I don't even know his name, to be honest. This is my great-great-grandfather, and I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't even know his name here. I'm not even sure. This is, I guess, this is on my father's side of the family, in his uniform. This must have been from World War I. My mom and my aunt on my father's side were digging through old photos for today's episode, so I really appreciate that. Some of these photos I've never seen. I'm not even sure if we know exactly who all these people are. And then this is my great-grandfather, Alex Dube, on my dad's mother's side of the family. Here's another photo of him. So this is some research that we need to do to learn a little bit more about his experience, because holy smokes, look at that guy. Handsome fellow, hey? Let me see. Let's look at, here's another fellow. This is Richard Tunks. He's my great-great-grandfather, and he fought in the War of 1812 on the British side. They were on my mom's side of the family were all royalists or loyalists to the Queen. So they fought against the American invasion of Canada in 1812. I'm not exactly sure where they fought, but I've never even seen this photo until just today when I got these photos from my mom. This is my grandmother's brother, Bill. Bill Doob, and here's him in his uniform. I think this is right before he went over to Germany. He got to Germany kind of after the war ended, and he was stationed in Berlin, kind of helping keep the peace. I remember talking to him shortly before he passed away. Here's him later on. I think he was a commissionaire, I think, at this point. Talking about some of the hijinks they got up to, the soldiers in Germany. I think he just said it was a lot of fun. And then here's him with a bunch of his medals towards the end of his life there. He was a funny character. I've met him a number of times. And then let's go back to my mother's side of the family. This is my grandfather, Alan Cornell. And he served, and to be honest, I don't know if my mom is watching here, but here's this big photo. I didn't have time to stitch it together, so he served on a minesweeper in the Mediterranean during World War II. I don't know if I recognize him in any... Where on earth would he be in this photo? Here's the other side of it. I don't recognize him in here. Anyway, it's just very cool looking at these old photos. These guys on these boats. That would have been a scary place to be. He worked in the engine room on this minesweeper. They called them corvettes, and their job was to go and diffuse the underwater mines before the big boats the giant battleships and supply ships would come in. So you're on the tip of the spear there. If there's submarines or you yourself run into a mine, that boat's going down to the bottom of the ocean, and he would have been stuck in the very bottom of that ship if it hit a mine. It's not like you wouldn't be able to make it up to the top of that boat to jump off into a life raft. So he survived the war and came home, and so very proud of him for his service. All of my relatives. Here's my Elsie Ferguson, who is my great grandmother. So this would have been from World War I, I guess. Her in her uniform. This is the only photo that I have here of her on my mom's side of the family. And this is my Uncle Jeff. As part of the Sea Cadets here. He must have been like 16, 17 years old. He did serve in the Canadian military, and I remember visiting him when he was at Royal Roads in Victoria, British Columbia here, which is now a university. We were visiting him there when I was a kid, and my mom did send some photos of my Uncle Jeff's son, Thomas, but I don't know where I put those photos. Anyway, I just thought it would be kind of fun to take a look at some of these old photographs of my family and just reflect for just a moment here of these incredible people who enlisted or were drafted in various different conflicts. This is just my little bit of family history, but I'm sure many of you watching right now have similar photos in trunks and old dusty photo albums, and for one day of the year it might be worth just digging them out and taking a look at them and just thinking about what they saw and what they experienced. Some, like my my grandfather or my grandmother's brother didn't serve in combat, but we're probably going overseas expecting to be there right on the front lines, and we're probably very much relieved that they didn't. Although some of them were quite sad that they didn't see combat, which is crazy to me to think, because man, I don't know. I certainly would not want to, especially those wars where they were just meat grinders. Anyway, very, very interesting experience, to kind of thinking about how lucky I'm alive, how lucky I am to be alive today, and the sacrifices of the men and women over the 100 or plus years of this country. I'm a little bit of a loss for words. Yeah. Carol says you have his hairline. My a little bit, hey? Huh. That's pretty wild. Where is it? This way, turn. He's missing the mustache. I think that's what puts it over the edge. Anyway, thank you everyone for joining me. I want to, on the way out, play this clip again for anyone who missed it the first time around. And I'll end it here for the night. This is this recording of my good friend Jeremy playing The Last Post, and we'll see you guys on Saturday. On Saturday, we're going to be doing a painting of the space shuttle featuring the Canadarm reaching out front of the space shuttle as it's orbiting the Earth. On Saturday, it's the... Well, I'm not sure on that date because it was a mission, but it's roughly 40 years from when the Canadarm made its first appearance in space. And for Canadians, it's a big deal. For most people around the world, it's like the Canada what? Canadarm? Like, if you're a Canadian kid growing up in the 80s and 90s, anytime space was mentioned, the Canadarm was a big deal. So we'll talk about it on Saturday. So once again, everyone, thank you so much. We'll see you guys on Saturday. Please like, subscribe, hit notification bell, and we will see you then. And thank you again to all the veterans and the people that have sacrificed so much for us so that we can do something silly like this and make a painting. Good night, everybody.
Bye.